Good evening, everyone. The H1B Guy here, and tonight, the H1B Guy live on March 9th, 2022. Today, I'm going to cover a continued discussion on the H1B lottery, a little bit more around the immigration reform, as we've seen some new legislation introduced over the last week, a quick discussion on the April Visa Bulletin, and also taking your questions and comments. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube and like this video so that I can continue to produce more content like this for you. I also wanted to mention the H1B Guy offers a variety of consulting services. I help businesses and individuals solve complex work authorization issues in the recruitment process while bringing awareness to employment-based immigration benefits. If I can help you, please reach out. I'd love to hear how. And you can book an appointment directly with me via the h1bguy.com. Tonight's live stream is brought to you by Syndesis and Path to Canada, the ideal plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently located in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain, and by PERM-Ads.com, the industry leader in providing a seamless experience for employers and immigration attorneys navigating the complex PERM recruitment ad phase of the labor certification process. Well, it's hard to believe that we are almost halfway through the portal opening for the H1B lottery for fiscal year 2023. I continue to get a lot of questions from many of you surrounding the lottery. I know over the last month and a half, we've covered a lot around the H1B lottery, a lot of content concerning it. But what this goes to show is that the demand for the H1B visa continues to remain at an all-time high. Individuals who seek an opportunity here in the U.S. from all over the globe generally seek the H1B visa as an opportunity or an avenue for them to gain not only entry but work authorization here in the U.S. One of the biggest questions I continue to receive is, what are the changes for this year's lottery? And my answer is there really aren't any changes. There is an attestation that's in play for employers, but right now individuals have as many can have as many employers as they want submit their name in the portal, but employers can only submit individuals' names in at one time. So it gives the individual absolutely opportunities to be sponsored by multiple employers. But the biggest thing we continue to talk about is, what does that mean if one is selected but you don't want to work for them, right? So the first one that submits the actual physical petition would be considered the petitioner of record there. And if you decided you did not want to work for them, there really are limited options in terms of what you can and cannot do. But I think the biggest thing that we keep hearing is how slow the system is running. So I think that lends itself to the technology behind it that's driving back, some of the capabilities of employers to make sponsorship happen. But I've been a big proponent of moving to an e-file, and the question becomes, um, if they can't get the electronic lottery right, where they take in over 300,000 applications in a 17-day period, how can they consistently use an electronic-based system for filings? But just a quick recap for those of you who are maybe curious about what I'm talking about. On March 1st, the H1B lottery for non-exempt employers opened on noon Eastern Standard Time, and employers have, or petitioners have, until March 18th to submit individual names into the portal. And then individuals should be notified no later than March 31st. My guess is probably over that weekend. We've talked about that a little bit in terms of when I think the selection period would be done and individuals would be notified. So I think anywhere between Saturday the 19th, Sunday the 20th, kind of through the remainder of that week. I think you'll see individual profiles be updated in the My USCIS account, and petitioners begin to be notified. What that means then is that on April 1st, USCIS will then begin accepting paper petitions, and that should run through June 30th, so a 90-day period. Um, Again, if we start to look at what does that mean from a time frame, I think it means that sometime towards the end of July, there most likely would be a second lottery held. If we've learned anything from the last couple of years, the subsequent two lotteries held in the first electronic period, which was for fiscal year 2021, as we saw for fiscal year 2022, there were three lotteries held. So I'm going to stick with what I've been discussing over the last several weeks, which is to say, ultimately, I think that we'll see two lotteries for fiscal year 2023. I've gone on record and saying I expect there to be 310,000 submissions received by USCIS for individuals seeking H-1B sponsorship from employers. So I think that when we start to look at what does that mean, it means that it's at an all-time high. Year over year, we continue to see the demand go up with the electronic portal. And I think that that's just going to continue to be the case as long as they have this electronic selection process, which is a random selection period. I see a lot of you dropping your questions and comments in the chat. Please continue to do so. I'll definitely roll through those. I've got a couple of topics that I wanted to walk through tonight, and then get to the Q&A. As always, if you haven't already, please like this video. Make sure that you're subscribed to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube. If you're looking for ways that you can support the H1B Guy platform, you can do so currently through the super chat function here on YouTube. If you're watching this or listening to this at a future date, you can do so through buymeacoffee.com/the H1B Guy. There's also other means to be a producer of this content on this platform in the video. Everyone taking time to join me. Normally I do my live stream on Wednesdays for the most part. It's been so extremely busy. Staffing world is absolutely on fire right now. Job opening and job demand in the IT space specifically continues to be at an all-time high. So a lot going on in my world day to day, and just wanted to do something different. I don't really do a lot of PM streams in the Eastern time zone, and so wanted to give folks an opportunity to maybe check in a little bit later tonight or earlier in the morning, depending on where you are located. So again, just to kind of a quick recap, March 1st, portal opened. March 18th, the portal closes. I'm expecting somewhere around the 20th through the 25th, individuals and employers will be notified so that they can begin preparation for applications starting on April 1st. I'm still expecting there to be, again, 310,000 plus names that would be submitted into the lottery. Probability, I think, hovers somewhere around 27-25% of being selected. Of course, those odds reduce as a second lottery happens. But you as the individual have options, and those options are you can have multiple employers submit your name to hopefully increase your odds. Employers can only submit individual names one time, and have to now submit an attestation to that. So we've seen some small changes here. If you look at some of the new immigration reform, and we'll get to that, that's been out there, that's really kind of surrounding changes to the H1B visa, the L1 visa. You look at the Relief Act, which came out earlier this week. You're starting to see kind of a wage-based point of view in that H1B and L1 visa reform act, which I thought was really interesting. It wasn't an all-out wage-based selection. that they were talking about. If you look into it and kind of dive into it a little bit further, it really was more around individuals that were already possibly here in the US as I read through it. Really looking to prioritize US educated, which is something I've been a big proponent of for a long time. But it also has a prioritization for those being paid a higher wage and those with valuable skills with some of the language that was incorporated in that. So it'll be interesting to see how this H1B wage based selection, it continues to come up. And a lot of you have followed this platform for the better part of the last year and a half. Know that, I spoke out in favor of a wage based selection, but I still think that a hybrid type format within wage based selection is really where I think they want to go. But how do they get there? We've talked about and speculated a good bit what that means, and I've mentioned a wage-based selection where there are certain percentages that are allocated to each of the wage levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that those highest wages in those levels for specific MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, are awarded. And how would they go about that? Well, there is some random selection to it, right? A calculation involved, but it is about the wage based on it within the job level. I don't think we'll see what was proposed a year and a half ago, which is really just an all-out highest paid is who's going to be awarded. I don't think we'll ever get back to something along those lines, but possibly. I'm not sure. I think that could definitely be something that it won't be an outright wage-based selection, but I think it would be a hybridized version of it, excuse me, where it would incorporate the various wage levels and percentages around that. But let's move into some of this immigration reform that we've been seeing, as I previously alluded to, the H1B and L1 Visa Reform Act, which was introduced back on, March 3rd. Of course, you've got the Republican Senator Grassley and the Democratic Senator Durbin heavily involved in this. This is language that we've seen sort of on and off going back to 2007. I think that some of it continues to be recycled. And the reason why we're seeing this text just really in a different context is how can it be a combination of legislation? I think is really what it comes down to. I've talked about standalone bills really being, I think, the bills that would have the highest probability to see passage from an immigration reform point of view. There just hasn't been a lot of momentum surrounding significant reform overhaul, except for going back to the Fairness for High Skilled Immigrants Act, that being that Senate Bill S389, or S386, excuse me. But again, we've seen that text reintroduced in the form of the Eagle Act in the House. We haven't seen it called to the chamber and working its way through committee. I think that it may take a lot more time, which lends itself to the other piece of immigration reform which came out, which was the Relief Act, sponsored by Senator Cortez Masto, and of course our friend who we've talked about a good bit and previously mentioned, Senator Durbin. There is a green card recapture that's in that. It's an interesting piece of legislation. Look for more from this on me. Do I think that bill has a probability? No, I don't. But I think what you see is we are seeing different language surrounding um, the green card backlog and recapture and what that's going to mean going forward. I still am a big proponent of the Eagle Act and how that language is constructed. I think it still has a possibility, as it had a lot of bipartisan support, not only in the House, but also in the Senate. So we start to look at what are the bills that are standalone around immigration reform that have bipartisan support. What does that mean for their probability as they work their way through committee and onto the chamber floors? The more bipartisan support, the more signatures, the more that it is favorable to be behind this kind of reform, the more traction these standalone bills get. So that's what's really interesting about the timing of not only the H1B and L1 Visa Reform Act last week, back on the 3rd, but also the Relief Act here on this past Monday. So the timing around those being put out 4 days apart, two separate standalone bills, both from the Senate, is interesting. It's interesting to me the timing around it because it doesn't appear to me, and I haven't really gotten the feeling that there was going to be any substantial immigration reform work its way through before the end of the year. So what does all of this mean? Does this mean that these bills could be consolidated into others? Possibly. Could this language be used in a bigger spending bill? Possibly. But late last night or early this morning, we began to hear about, the omnibus, right? The $1.5 trillion spending bill, which needed to be passed by March 11th. It sounds like it was passed in the House, and will most likely be making its way through the Senate. We begin to hear about, not a lot of not a lot of language in there for immigration specifically. It did have some funding designated for USCIS specifically. And some of that funding was earmarked to quote unquote clear the backlog. So these are these processing delays that we've been talking about for the better part of a year and a half now here on this platform. Here's USCIS asking for more funding, I believe to the tune of 270 plus million in terms of funding to help. Hopefully, it is a relief there. Hopefully, it allows them to reduce some of these really atrocious delays and backlogs that are created in the many visa service centers that they have. That's also been a constant and consistent theme here on the channel. But when we look at and you say 1.5 trillion, and there's very minimal in there as it relates to immigration as a whole, some of it around border protection and a few other things. But USCIS looks to be on the right side of the funding. Again, 270 plus million. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I would have guessed in the next day or so for this omnibus bill. Um, as I mentioned last week, and I'll bring it up again, I do plan to do more of a standalone around the H1B and L1 Visa Reform Act. I may couple that with the Relief Act just to put out kind of a two-parter in one post. We're talking about both of these standalone pieces of legislation from Senator Durbin. He has his hands all over it. We start to look at his track record in the Senate and the Judiciary Committee and what legislation was proposed by him and actually made its way through, and it's very minimal. His track record has not been very good. And so we start to look at what does that mean? Well, I think when you see these standalone bills and he has his name on it, you can expect almost nothing to come from it. Will language that's incorporated in these bills be adapted or adopted or amended into some sort of larger comprehensive reform? Possibly. But I've not felt like, over the last few years that some sort of comprehensive immigration reform would be a possibility and would bear any fruit for quality reform as it relates to those high skilled immigrants currently in the backlog, as it relates to relief for their dependents. And then around the processing delays that we've seen, they just continue to be an issue. They've made some adjustments from some of the EAD extension perspectives, but it still has created a lot of issues. And as I've talked about before, it was almost human crisis level that was going on. But Anyway, a lot of action happening right now as it relates to immigration reform. In terms of text that's been recently introduced, it doesn't mean that there is change in the very near future, but what it does mean is that this is something that we continue to see. There's a lot of momentum that's been behind it. So, how do we find the right standalone piece of legislation that can garner the right bipartisanship and hopefully see its way through chambers? Uh, S386 was as close as we got back in December of 2020. So we'll continue to monitor the Eagle Act. We'll see what impact this Relief Act has on the Eagle Act as a whole. We'll see what happens with this H1B and L1 Visa Reform Act. If it's just text from Senator Grassley and from Senator Durbin that really has no merit behind it, or if there is some real intent. Wanted to ask you, if you haven't already, please like this video. Make sure that you are subscribed to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube. Click the bell for notifications if you haven't already, so that you're notified anytime we do go live, like we have here tonight on Wednesday at a little after 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the US. For those of you who may be joining me for the first time, I physically sit just outside of Metro Atlanta. I am a work authorization and immigration expert as it relates to staffing. Any discussions that we have here are merely my opinions. I am not an attorney. I do not provide legal advice, but if you need one, I have several that I could recommend to you. But for those of you who have been following for quite some time, I thank you for your continued support. Doing these live streams is one of the things that I really enjoy. Taking on the Q&As that we're going to do here in a little bit, something that I really look forward to, and I know a lot of you do as well. So I just can't thank you for enough for taking time out of your evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are. If you want to drop, we did this last week. I think that this should be something new that we continue to do. If you want to drop where you're watching in the chat, please put that in, and I'll pull that up here in a little bit. But we had folks from all across the globe watching last Tuesday during the H1B Guy Live, the H1B Lottery fiscal year 2023 special edition. So post it in the chat where you're watching from. Thank you for joining me here tonight. As I mentioned earlier, if you're looking for ways you can support the H1B Guy platform, you can do so currently through the super chat function here on YouTube. If you're watching or listening to this at a later date, you can do so through buymeacoffee.com/the H1B Guy, or there are alternate means to help produce the H1B Guy platform. Again, continue to drop your questions and comments in the chat. I'll definitely be getting to those here in a few minutes. Last Tuesday as well, I did post the H1B Guy forecast, the April 2022 Visa Bulletin predictions for employment-based preferences. For those of you who've already checked that out, you probably noticed I'm not really expecting a lot of movement. I did not post any retrogression in this. It was a pretty conservative prediction video and post, to be honest with you. And I say that because there just seems to be a lot of uncertainty right now about whether there is going to be corrective action in April or May, or whether there's not. So I'm only anticipating some very small movement in EB1 for India and China, and then EB2 for India. If you haven't already, just again, about a month of movement there is what I'm anticipating. And then really kind of a holding pattern for all of the other categories. Some of my reasoning behind that, and we begin to see some of the reporting that's been coming out from USCIS in Q1 in terms of the amounts of cases that they've been able to process. In those numbers, I think I saw somewhere around 33,000 they were able to approve in Q1. And if you kind of take those calculations and start to forecast through the remainder of the year, it appears to me that USCIS is probably only going to get to somewhere around 180,000 or so, which would again be another wastage year over year. and we start to look at what is that amount of wastage. Last year it was about 80,000. This year it appears to be about the same. So literally in the last 2 years, you're looking at somewhere around 160,000 employment-based green cards from spillover that would be wasted just to lack of processing capabilities from USCIS. It's an absolute crime. But unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that we can do about it other than speak our opinions and our voices on it. For those of you that are in the green card backlog that have been waiting 3,500, 3,800 days, and then you start to look at what are the years before you'll receive your green card, and it's estimated that that's somewhere around 90 years. It's pretty incredible in terms of what that wait looks like. But for those of you who have recently received your EAD, hopefully with AP, it's giving you some sort of flexibility so that you have a freedom to choose who you work for, how much you make, where you live, and your freedom to travel. But again, I think if we go back and point back to last year, it was around April or May that we really began to see a lot of the advanced forward movement, that rapid forward movement, if you will, in EB3 categories. But that scaled itself back starting in November, December of this past year. For the last several months, it's been alluded to of a possibility of corrective action, but we've seen pretty aggressive movement in EB2 over the last few months. So I just am uncertain if that's going to continue. I've been kind of back and forth on the possibility of the corrective action retrogression happening. I'm still really interested in what's going to happen with Mexico this month. My prediction for Mexico this month was a hold. But if we see corrective action in Mexico, but we don't see any in the India EB2 categories, I do think if we see corrective action in Mexico, I think we could see possibly the corrective action for India sometime in May. Again, though, it may not happen. We could continue to see this kind of slow and methodical movement that's been happening in EB2. Why is Mexico related to India EB2 at all? It's just a matter of number usage. That's really what it comes down to, and what those counts are. The documentarily qualified, and then those that are currently in line. But let's go ahead and jump on into our Q&A here for tonight. If you have any questions or comments, please drop those in the chat. Again, if you'd like to post where you're currently watching or listening from, would love to acknowledge that as well. Of course, we've covered already tonight, again, a continued conversation around the H1B lottery for fiscal year 2023. We've talked about some of the immigration reform text that has been released in the last week or so, including the H1B and L1 Visa Reform Act, the Relief Act, and as well as the lack of inclusion in the $1.5 trillion omnibus bill that broke late last night, early this morning. Of course, just a quick conversation around the April 2022 Visa Bulletin, excuse me, and where I think there may not be a whole lot of movement that's going to happen. But we're definitely going to be interested to see, probably sometime in the next week or so, the bulletin will post and where we stand on that as well. So I'm going to jump into this Q&A. Again, if you're looking for ways to support the H1B Guy platform, you can do so through the super chat function currently on YouTube. Or if you're watching this at a later date, there are ways to do so in the video description. Hey, Bala, how are you? Thanks for joining me tonight. Can I explain exactly what this means? Ming amendment to take back spilled GCs due to Trump and Miller measures, and COVID is not possible for fiscal year 2022 EB quota. Yeah, it basically means that the green cards that were part of the spillover, right? I believe it was 262,000 last year, roughly. And only somewhere around 172,000 were utilized. It just means that those went back into the family-based preferences and cannot be recaptured for employment-based. Is there any way to check for an employee if my employer already filed or not? Trudy, that's a great question. If you have a My USCIS account, you may be able to see submitted on your profile. So if you haven't checked, I'd love for you if you can log in and check to see if you see that on your My USCIS account. If not, it may just not be updated. Another good way to confirm is via the immigration attorney with the employer, your petitioner. Ask them if they can confirm that your name has been submitted into the portal. Ball says it's a very good sign for EBGC backlog. Now there's a confirmation that EB fiscal year 2022 quota is 292,000 plus GC visa numbers. Yeah, but again, as I just said, USCIS has only processed 33,000 in Q1. So it isn't about the numbers available, it's about the processing capabilities. Right, and those that are qualified within that number, it isn't about the allocation. Last year was 262,000, and we went into this year with almost 245,000 in the queue, maybe more than that. So again, it's not about what's available; it's about the lack of processing capabilities. That's where the crime is. Azim says, "Sir, I'm a J1 visa and a cook position. My employer wants to hire me as a possible chef eligible for H1B visa. I have 8 years culinary experience, 2-year bachelor's degree. Please guide me." So the biggest thing about chef, as I remember doing some research on this, Azim, is that you have to work in a very astute or highly recognizable restaurant, right? So I would say like elite of the elite. We're not talking like, your local family restaurant here. We're talking like reviewed and critically critical food critic and acknowledged. So there is some information out there on this in terms of a specialty occupation as a chef, but it's pretty specific on the restaurant has to be widely acknowledged as a top restaurant in its space. Okay, so it's not an easy thing to do. Trudy says, is registration process first come, first serve, or the lottery would be done once and only after March 18th? Yeah, great question. This is actually a really good question, and kind of how things used to work with the paper trail, but it still wasn't first come, first serve. What the current system is that employers, petitioners, have from March 1st, noon of March 1st until March 18th. I'm not sure if it's noon or 5 p.m. what the cutoff is yet. I'll have to look into that. I haven't seen that published. To get individual names, beneficiary names into the electronic portal. Once those names are submitted in an electronic portal and the cutoff has happened, USCIS has an algorithm that they utilize for random electronic selection. And those selected, 65,000 and 25,000, those employers are notified once that selection takes place via their My USCIS account. Good question. Hey, Adrian, how you doing? Thanks for joining me here tonight. Appreciate all your support over the last several weeks. Thank you very much. If I don't get selected by the lottery in April, my OPT expires in June. Is there an automatic extension of my OPT because I'm waiting to hear back from second lottery? So I don't believe that you're cap gap eligible. What is When does your OPT expire, and are you eligible for an OPT STEM extension? Is my question. And if you are, then you can file that STEM extension 60 days before the expiration, I believe, is when you can begin that process. But if you were still in a pending status and you were able to file your OPT extension, um, you could still be a cap gap. But if not, this may be a little tricky for you. There definitely might be a gap or a period of time here, and your options are pretty limited. So let me know, what's the expiration in June of your OPT, and is that are you STEM eligible, or is that just your traditional OPT? Is there a new rule coming in that multiple lottery is not possible from this year? Is it really true? My understanding is that individuals can still have as many employers submit their name as they would like. However, employers are going to have to submit an attestation that they are only submitting the individual name once. I don't really think that's going to change anything. I still think we're going to see 310,000 names or applications received by USCIS. Shruti. Hey, sweet seller, nice to see you, my friend. Do I think any of the bills could pass and create retrogression? Is the omnibus bill the one referred to in the VB causing EB2 retrogression due to EB5? Yeah, it had some EB5 language in it. It looked like it extended it. I don't have it in front of me exactly, but was it 2027 or 2037? I believe I read. Again, what are those numbers, right? When we start to look at the percentages and how that breaks itself down and what EB5 means from the investor standpoint, that the EB5's currently been in a U, which is an unavailable status on the Visa Bulletin for several months now. Um, if that does come back online and is available, there was some allusion to that creating some corrective action in March's bulletin. Um, but the question for me becomes, how big are those numbers? And are they big enough to create a significant need to have corrective action? That's where I'm having a hard time with the calculations around it, and how substantial these numbers are. Is there a huge backlog of EB5 individuals located outside of the US that could create that? I don't know. It just seems like um, it's so uncertain, and they're not really sure what that impact is going to have. But I think that any of these bills could create retrogression. Well, the hope is that they create relief, right? A reprieve for folks that are waiting 3,800, 4,000 days. That's the hope. But great question. I think it's just so fluid right now. You and I have been talking about this since November, the possibility of retrogression sometime in April or May. And, here we are, literally, anywhere between 5 to 7 days, 8 days away from the April Visa Bulletin coming out. And what's it going to show us? Is it going to show us 2, 3 months, 4 months of forward movement in EB2 again, and get that date close towards the end of the year? We haven't seen any movement on the dates of filing, so I don't expect there to be a huge leap, because that's still September of 2013. But great question. A lot of uncertainty. I don't know. Again, if they're alluding to the omnibus bill and the Visa Bulletin for March, they know a lot that we don't. That's for sure. Hey, Prema, how are you? EAD premium processing update. How long will it take? Are they allowing premium processing for EADs right now? Is I haven't seen that, but again, if it is premium processing, it comes down to they have 10 days, right? To adjudicate or approve, or they have to return that fee. Adrian, what are alternatives for F1 visa holders who OPT expire without having obtained the H1B visa? Well, do you want to stay in the US? And if you do, then CPT really becomes your next option. And why is that so bad? Well, the CPT is more education, which means what? More tuition and fees for you as an international student. I would also say that syndesis would be a great option for you, Adrian, if you don't think it's going to happen, and if you think your employer would be interested in relocating your job outside of the US, possibly even to Canada. I hate it that this is something that is part of our discussion, but it just is. And the folks at syndesis do a great job. If I can help you or create an introduction for you in any way, if that's an option that you need to consider potentially after April, check back on Friday, April the 8th. I'll be doing a live stream with Mark Pavlopoulos from Syndesis and Path to Canada, as well as Daniel Mandelbaum, the Canadian immigration attorney. So we're going to be talking about options for folks who maybe weren't selected that want to go ahead and begin that process. But yeah, your options are this: CPT, continuing to work with a DSO and being enrolled in a program that is in line with your degree, so that you can continue to work in the occupation that you're in. Or consider a return to your home country, which may not be the choice you want to take, or Canada. Those are really the options that I see. Not being from China, India, Mexico myself, why would applying for a green card not be good alternative to the H-1B visa? Well, it's really a matter of you getting through the process while you still maintain work authorization. If your employer wanted to do this, so if you do expire in June, for example, but if they started the perm labor process for you now, there could be a period of time where you would be outside the country. But if again, country of origin playing a big factor, rest of world is current. So by the time your perm labor was certified and your I-140 was filed, the I-485 could be filed in parallel. So yeah, I think that's an option, but the option most likely would be you would have to leave the country for a period of time. Let's say they started it now, and that's 18 months away at best case scenario. Sweet Seller asks, why is USCIS so contradictory? One hand, they're asking for interfiling due to large numbers, and they're also talking about corrective action. Any thoughts on this contradiction? Yeah, they're a big mess. It's sad, but true. It's a reality that we are facing. That this continues to be a problem that is hampering our innovation and technology advancements here in the country because of our archaic citizenship and immigration services process and their capabilities. I think it's just because they just don't know. They don't know. If their reporting is anything like their technology, it's terrible. And so I think that that's what creates a lot of the anxiety. It just does. It creates a lot of the anxiety is that there's such a delay, there's such an unknown, there's so much inconsistencies day to day that occur. I mean, you could find example after example of this, right? And so I think that is that systemic cultural issue that we've been talking about that goes predates Trump, goes back to the Obama era. This is where it really began, was in the second term of President Obama. So whatever leadership took place there within USCIS walls, and kind of the culture that came from that, is exactly where you can point to. It continued and only got worse under the Trump administration. And unfortunately, for as bad as President Biden and his administration has been for immigration, I don't want to give the leadership at USCIS a pass, but I do realize that they were dealt a pretty ugly hand, pretty terrible hand, and that these things just take time. They just take time. Assuming that Mexico does not get affected, is it safe to assume India will not be impacted for at least a couple months? Yeah, I felt like these might have a correlation. But when we start talking about contradictions, this is where I'll make one. That answer is, Mexico could remain flat, but we still could see corrective action in India either this month or next month. And the only reason why I say that is, why is the Department of State going to go on record in the Visa Bulletin and put the possibility of corrective action in EB2 India out there if it wasn't something that was being considered, or that the data was leading them to that conclusion? So yeah, I mean, I'm very fearful that for this movement that we've seen, we could see 300 plus days of retrogression occur in a matter of the next week or so. It's scary, but again, we start to look at what's the correlation, and the correlation is this. El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico were all mentioned with the possibility of corrective action. We saw significant corrective action for EB4 for El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We didn't see it for Mexico. Now we have the possibility of corrective action being alluded to for India EB2, and it just leads me down to a conclusion, which is where there's smoke, there's fire. There's absolutely a possibility. Regarding the USCIS portal creation, it won't create any issue, right? For example, my employer might have also created one under my name. Yeah, you should be able to link those. I haven't physically done this and witnessed it happen, but my understanding is that the employer creates it on your behalf, and then you can tie it back in. Again, I don't know what the unique ID outlier is, but if you're really curious, I think the easiest way for you to get verification on this is to follow up with your employer's attorney, simply in an email, just to ask for confirmation that your name was submitted into the portal. So your OPT expires June of 2023, so you have time. Yeah, you have this year, and you also have next year too, assuming that employer is satisfied with your work and going to continue along the employment path with them. So you could have roughly 2 shots this year: first lottery, second lottery, and a first lottery next year. So I would say by mid-April of next year, if you haven't been awarded, selected, and your employer hasn't submitted the full petition on your behalf, I would then begin looking at my options, roughly around actually April. I'd start mid-April, 60 plus days in advance of your expiration. So 1st of April, if you haven't been selected, I'm beginning my transition, whatever that is. Hey, Anil, how you doing? Thanks for joining me tonight. Why are consulate in India not opening consulate interview slots? What are they busy at? Great question. I think that's the same question a lot of folks here are asking about the Texas Visa Center, the Nebraska Visa Center. At some point, COVID can no longer be the excuse. We have to get back to a return to normal. Even if it's not going to be in person, it's got to be Dropbox. We've got to allow this to happen. There are folks that had H1Bs that they haven't been able to get a consulate appointment going back to 2021. It's laughable, and it's sad, Anil, and it's creating issues for folks who have a legitimate employer, have legitimate employment, and need to be physically present in the U.S. Would any barriers for me to get employment-based green card before the H-1B? If my employer is willing to sponsor me, what are some hurdles that I and my employer need to consider? No, I'm actually, there are individuals that I know from South American countries that have gone through this process. It really just a matter of the recruitment, meaning your employer has done recruitment and cannot find a U.S. citizen or green card holder that can perform your job. Does that make sense? Literally, that's what it comes down to, is that your employer has to go on record and do a series of recruitment that says, I cannot find another individual in the US that has Adrian's master's degree and 3 years of experience. And that experience has to be documented via what we call experience letters from previous employers. Okay. That's a big thing in the perm labor process, is being able to get those experience letters by the I-140 stage so that you can attest to that 3 years of experience. Hey, Jim, how are you? What is the reason USCIS to make second lottery if they pick 65,000 applications in March 19th? Great question. So What we've seen over the last few years because of the electronic selection period, we've got a lot of individual names going into the portal, and then the application rate for last year for round one was 70%. So think about it, right? Only 70% of the overall, the 85,000 overall, actually submitted a paper application. So when that is the case, what does that mean? Well, USCIS has a legal obligation to issue out all 80,000. Okay. So when we start to look at calculations, that means that just under 60,000, so 59,500 applications were received. Okay. So that leaves somewhere around 25,500 remaining. And then they take the remaining pool of those individuals to reselect. You're just asking about the 65,000, but I'm also including the advanced master's degree category, that other 20,000 in my 85,000 calculations. Hey, Mateo, how are you? What are my recommendations on people that have an employer sponsoring them for H1B lottery, but that have other interested employers entering them in the lottery? Is it legal to get two different sponsors in the lottery? Yes, it is legal. If so, how would it look if the individual gets both applications selected? That's a great question. Something we've been talking about. Lastly, how does a potential secondary lottery affect individuals that have expiring EADs due to OPT expiring? Can this be extended until the second lottery? So you can have multiple employers sponsor you. If both are selected, the first one that submits your paper petition has the rights to you, which is really interesting, right? It means that it could be the employer you're not currently working for. And then what does that mean? Well, you can't transfer that visa to the employer you're working for. It's just not how it works. So what I would do is make sure if you're selected multiple times that you inform whoever it is that you intend to go with them, that you're upfront on that, and don't allow them to submit your paper petition without your consent. But that's a great question. Now, we were talking about this a little bit earlier with Adrian, the expiring EAD, and this is where I would make sure what does the cap gap look like? And I think ultimately it's just for the first lottery. If you are in a situation where your EAD may expire before the second lottery takes place, I believe you would be considered out of status. But I would definitely clarify that with an attorney if you haven't already. But just based on my understanding of how that works, um, if you aren't awarded by March 31st, then I would go ahead and make secondary plans. And I know that probably isn't what you want to hear, but again, I want to be a voice of reason for you. And I want to make sure that the information that I provide you from my opinion is that if you don't make it by that March 31st deadline, and let's say you expire your OPT expires in May or June, before the second lottery would be held, which I would say middle end of July. Yeah, you're going to need to make secondary plans. Now, if you're selected in the second lottery and let's say you're outside of the US, the employer can still go through the application, get approval, and bring you back into the US under H1B. But there just may be a gap of time. So I would start to look at contingency plans, like I talked about earlier with Adrian. CPT, I hate to advise it because that means more money, more international tuition for you. Um, and working through a DSO and having to be enrolled in school. But then you have to look at, do you want to return to your home country? Do you want to consider Canada? Do you want to look at somewhere else? The options aren't great, but that's just the truth of the matter, Mateo. Thanks for joining me tonight. Appreciate it. Hey, Anil says, I'm great. How are you doing? Do you think new immigration policies will pass through and allow legitimate immigrants to become permanent residents and citizens? Man, well, that's a loaded question, Anil. I don't think we're going to see any real substantial immigration reform until 2024. I don't think we're going to see much this year or next year. I hope I'm wrong. But I'm just kind of reading through the climate and the midterm and how, the shift is happening here politically in this country. Um, yes, the voice for relief for the green card backlog is loud. Yes, they are organized, but that does not mean that there is a majority consensus amongst the elected officials and amongst their constituents. I hate to say it like that because that's just not how I view it. Again, you can look at all the statistics out there, and I'm not for open borders and amnesty, but I am for less restrictive immigration for high skilled immigrants, specifically in STEM and medical. I've talked about that a lot. I think that to me, when we start to look at, you start to look at the number of patents that come from the U.S. and how that number comes from a high variety of international immigrants. That Immigrants that have come internationally here to the U.S. I think that we have to wake up because countries like Canada, countries like Australia, countries like Germany, they are becoming more and more attractive to the best and brightest. Our restrictive laws and those that have been stuck in the green card backlog that are saying, don't go what I've been going through, that voice is becoming louder and clearer. For green card to have two masters, my employer needs to prove that they cannot find someone like me in the U.S. job market. But isn't that the same to prove that need to be provided for H-1B visas? Yes. But there are a lot of different ways that they go about it in perm labor. They have to post your job on the intranet, the company intranet. It has to be on an external facing website. So that's where my good friend Carl Bolsmeyer at perm-ads.com comes in. They are a one-stop shop for that perm recruitment advertising phase. So you've got radio, television, and print media that is still a part of that. The external advertising on a website, screenshots, intranet, and then any applicants that come in have to be discredited. And it's all about requirements. The requirements meaning what your employer requires for that specific job, and then you being able to attest to your experience and have evidence that proves that you have that previous experience. You didn't earn that experience for your employer. Hey, Jim, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate you joining me tonight and taking time out of your day. Again, the processing for green card for Spain, I'm guessing somewhere around 18 months from when the process is kicked off to when it wraps up. Hey, Mateo, thanks so much. I know that those probably aren't the answers you want to hear, but I want you to have a plan in place. I know you came here to pursue an opportunity. You came here to get an education, and you need to know what the paths and options are for you. So thank you. Appreciate your support. Anil, yeah, I guess this immigration reforms is a political stunt. It absolutely is. That's the point. Um, I call it the magician theory, right? Watch the hand, not the hat. And we're seeing a lot of that going on right now. You're seeing some of the old guard in the Senate grasping and holding on to something, and follow the money on that to get your reasons why, Anil. But what's the plan? What's the 5 year? What's the 10 year? I sure hope that the climate changes in the next 5 years. I think over the next couple of years, as we head into this midterm, there's so much uncertainty. Standalone bills still, to me, I believe, have the highest probability, but there's still a lot of unknown in it. So, hey, Movie Wonders, how are you? How many people applied for H1B in 2022? Yeah, that number was 308,000 for fiscal year 2022. Of course, the current lottery is ongoing for fiscal year 2023. Just wanted to thank all of you who have joined me here tonight. If you haven't already, please feel free to like this video. Would love it if you would offer me some support there. Subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube if you haven't already. If you haven't, check out the H1B Guy podcast. It is on Anchor, but it can be found on your preferred podcast platforms. Leave me a rating on iTunes, on Spotify. It's on Stitcher. It's on Pocket Casts. But thank you to all of my supporters here on YouTube and those of you who continue to find these live streams. So just thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your support, and everyone who took time here to post questions and comments here in the chat. I just can't thank you enough for that. If you're looking for ways to support the H1B Guy platform while we wrap up, you can do so through the super chat function here on YouTube. If you're watching this at a later date, there are ways to be a producer of the H1B Guy platform in the video description below. Any of your contributions are reinvested back into the technology that helps put on these live streams, and helps to produce the weekly videos that I put out. I'm a one-man show here. This was something that was born from a vision back in June of 2020. Hard to believe that here we are, gosh, 20 plus months almost into this thing, and we just continue to grow. Our traffic and views continue to grow, and I think a lot of that is just due to the fact that I speak from the heart and I speak my honest opinion. And I love this world of high-tech, high-skilled immigration. I love the world of technology staffing and everything that goes into that. So I think that honestly, when I look back at the why behind this, we're just going to continue to speak the facts. We're going to continue to talk about the problems, and we're going to continue to be honest with you and your questions and advise you to do what is best for you. Of course, all of my opinions are for your own personal entertainment, right? That's really what it comes down to. But would like to take time here to thank our sponsors who continue to allow me to put on these live streams. The good folks at Syndesus and Path to Canada, the Ideal Plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently located in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain. If you're facing an H-1B denial or OPT expiration, as we've been talking about here tonight, do not get caught off guard. Make sure you have a plan B. And the folks at Syndesus and Path to Canada are your answers. To find out if you qualify, there's a link in the video description below. Please be sure to use that and let them know that I sent you, and someone from Syndesus or Path to Canada will be in touch. And also by my good friend Carl Balsmeyer at PERM-ads.com. We talked about them and their platform tonight. They are the one-stop shop for PERM immigration recruitment advertising. Literally, they are the industry leader in providing a seamless experience for employers and immigration attorneys navigating the complex PERM recruitment ad phase of the labor certification process. If you're looking to reduce your costs and overhead associated with PERM labor certification recruitment advertising, let PERM-ads.com help you. Again, look for the H1B Guy news sometime on probably Saturday morning. A lot more planned over the next several weeks. So thank you for your continued contributions and support here. I cannot do this without all of you and your support. I just really, really appreciate it. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you so much. If you're still listening or watching, thank you. I really just appreciate your continued support and taking the time to watch my content. It means more to me than I ever express. So really, thank you again from absolutely the bottom of my heart for your continued support and everyone who joined in here tonight. With that being said, if you haven't already, one last time, please like this video, subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube, and click the bell for notifications. Yes, that's still a thing, so that you're notified anytime I post new content here to the channel or go live like I did here tonight on March 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, join the Telegram group if you haven't, the H1B Guy podcast, and of course, here, the H1BGuy.com and the H1B Guy channel on YouTube. I am Robert. I'm the H1B Guy, your global source for all things H1B.